I started this event back in 2017. Our new home at the couch, create a space where people can just share a moment of their lives and not fear judgment, criticism, but feel very empowered to be as authentic, vulnerable, and real as they wanted to be. And we've all been there. You think you're all alone, you don't think anyone cares, you don't believe that anyone will understand, and you think that you can't get out. Right now, someone out there is going through exactly the same emotional process. Your circumstances are unique when you went through it, but the feeling of suck is very much the same. The loneliness, the guilt, the shame, all the dysfunctional stories in your head. Someone's going through that right now.
As Vancouver grows, so does the need for professional legal representation. With over 30 years of experience, Muldoon & Company offers initial consultation where your rights and options are explained to you with no obligation. Offices are located downtown in the Marine Building at 355 Burrard.
Models are on display at Freeway Mazda. New Mazda sedans, crossovers, and SUVs surround the facility, and fully loaded versions occupy the floor of the showroom. At Freeway Mazda, 154th Street and 104 Avenue in Surrey.
I want to give a trigger warning. All the stories that you're going to hear tonight are personal in nature, and they can encroach on dark topics such as addictions, abuse, self-harm. Invite Bonnie Nicole to the stage to share her experience.
Vulnerability is not winning or losing. It's having the courage to show up and be seen when we have no control of the outcome. Vulnerability is not weakness. It's our greatest measure of courage. Of course, no other than Brené Brown. Being vulnerable is something we come into this world as. We are vulnerable to our surroundings and rely on others. We rely on others to provide us with food, shelter, and clothing, but most importantly, love. Vulnerability for me was a weakness because as a child, I was abused by both my parents and nothing was ever done about it. For me, I thought strength came from holding on to every trauma I ever went through and keeping all the family secrets to myself. I relied on my family to provide me with the essentials, and they did. I was fed and I was clothed. Therefore, I felt I owed them. For many years, I kept all these secrets that eventually turned into deep shame. And I carried that shame around for 30 years. Vulnerability today means so much more than when I was a child. To me today, it means strength and courage. Being vulnerable is not just about being open about our emotions, but it's standing up for yourself and for others. It's doing the right thing. It's owning your mistakes. And it's telling the truth. And so tonight, I give you me in my most vulnerable state. Looking into my life growing up, people thought I had it so good. Well-known family name, I lived in a big mansion on 50 acres, and money seemed endless. But I've learned to never judge a book by its cover because you never know where someone's been if you haven't walked a mile in their shoes. I was molested by my stepfather from an age I cannot recall because I was so young, and this continued until I was 10. But life goes on. Nothing was done. Our family dynamic changed in that my parents did not live together anymore, but we still did family functions. It was as if everything was just swept under the rug. My mother never won the greatest mother award either. She taught me from an early age how to hide bruises that she left on my body, which was very beneficial as I got older and entered abusive relationships. Secrecy breeds shame, and shame keeps you sick. I started stockpiling all this shame at a young age, and keeping everything in made me really sick. All this shame made me, I made really bad decisions growing up. I figured that I had such a crappy life that I would be such a crappy person. When I was 14, I chose to live with my stepfather over my mother. I could manipulate him and not my mom. And so living with him meant that I had endless amounts of money, I had name brand clothes. By 14, I was allowed to take the car. I used what he did to me to get what I wanted. I was a high school dropout, and I did a whole lot of partying. By not healing my trauma, I gave myself more trauma from all the bad decisions I made. So when I became a mother, I started to really realize the family cycle was continuing. I was partying the same way my mom partied when I was a kid. Eventually, I lost custody of my children and ended up in a very violent relationship. When we enter relationships, we should be vulnerable. We should discuss our fears, our dreams, our past, our traumas, and let them know who we really are. I refused to be vulnerable for so many years, and for good reason. I don't think anybody knew who I was. Honestly, I don't think I knew who I was. People saw me as rough around the edges and tough. Those 8 years I spent in an abusive relationship taught me that vulnerability would get me killed. Eventually, I got my kids back. Eventually, I left the abusive relationship. But being vulnerable still was a weakness to me. Strength to me was being strong. It was keeping the shame in. It was that I went through so much that I must be such a strong person. But it really came down to other people's opinions of me, which really aren't my business. But I was such a people pleaser, I cared about what other people thought about me. If everyone knew I was a drug addict, that I lost my kids, that I allowed a man to control my life, that I still talked to my abuser, that I sold drugs to make ends meet, I would be looked at as a monster. But I'm not a monster. So how did I come to share my story and be vulnerable? First, it started when I was at my lowest point, also known as rock bottom. There's one place to go when you're that low, and it's up. I was coming off of drugs. I was fighting with my ex-husband's brother, and he refused to leave my house. We were fighting so bad, we were throwing glasses at each other, there was tables being flipped, and he wouldn't leave unless I gave him his rent money back. So I threw a $100 bill at his face, and I said, why don't you go overdose? 6 days later, he did, and he died. That was a beginning for me. I didn't want to be that person anymore. I didn't want to be that person that told someone to go die, and I didn't want to be that person that was being told to go die. So I had to change. So I quit partying. I then attended my first event, surrounded by strong and vulnerable women. They shared their story of not only trauma, but how they got over it. So they shared their triumphs. And literally this light bulb went on in my head that I should share my story. So I did. I shared it with the lady sitting at my table. And about 30 minutes later, I was pushed onto a stage to share my story with the whole audience. I learned then to stand on my story and not in it. And at that moment, I was 100% authentic and vulnerable. Vulnerability means being authentic. Instead of being laughed at, booed off stage, or being looked at as a monster, I stood to a standing ovation, tears, and understanding. At that moment, I knew I was meant for greatness, and that my mission was to help other people be vulnerable, to help other people get past the trauma, that we're not bad people because of the bad things that happened to us. Since that day, I've embraced vulnerability in my everyday life. For me to move forward, I needed to forgive myself for all my past mistakes. I came to realize that my brother's overdose was not my fault. I came and asked my children for forgiveness. I also told my parents that I needed to live my life without them in it. The biggest part that took me a bit was being open about my stepdad molesting me. At first, I would say I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, but I would never give up who the abuser was. I always feared that I would ruin my grandmother's name. And even though she's been dead since 2004, she was well known in the business world. And I felt that it was my duty to keep the family name and to keep the secrets under the rug. But when I went public and people started to realize who abused me, I found out that other children were also molested by the same man. And not just any children, but the children that I babysat as a teenager. How could I have thought that I was the only one that he would hurt? I wanted to run back into my hole in that moment and be strong and continue to keep the secret. But here's the thing. Once you get used to being vulnerable, it's really hard to go back. The night I found out about the other person was the night that I took myself to the RCMP and I pressed charges. And in that moment, I took my power back. I no longer worried about anybody but myself, my well-being, and doing the right thing. And that was telling the truth. So today I'm a great mom. I no longer feel the need to numb my life with drugs. I wake up every day, and I mean every day, grateful that I woke up because the alternative sucks. I admit my weaknesses, but in admitting my weaknesses, I show how courageous I am. I'm afraid to be alone. I'm afraid I'll never find true love. I'm afraid my children will repeat the same cycles that I repeated, that my mom repeated, that her mother repeated. But I'm not going to let my fears dictate my life anymore. Bob Marley once said, being vulnerable is the only way to allow your heart to feel true pleasure. And because of my vulnerability, I not only feel pain, but I've learned to feel extreme joy. Thank you.
For the last 22 years of my career working with the big banks, one of the big things that people ask me is, Sean, what are you passionate about? And why do you do this business? Being able to help clients save money. Let's face it, life's expensive and it doesn't seem to be getting any cheaper. The key is consolidation and refinancing.
Express Lane Auto Body is family owned and operated with over 20 years of auto repair experience. The ICBC accredited body shop is located at 132nd and 78th Avenue in Surrey.
So what happens when you just get overloaded with guilt, shame, and all those wonderful dark emotions? Well, I'll give you a glimpse down one storyline. I put on a mask and I kept everyone at least arm's length, if not more, but I created this beautiful, beautiful mask that everything was a-okay even though I was dying inside. Fast forward to a few years ago when I started learning about this vulnerability bit. I admitted to a very, very good friend of mine that in my past, I overcompensated because I didn't believe that anyone would like me for who I was. So I became more than what I should be because you would like that version. And as Anita mentioned, overshared just a little bit. And then she got really, really upset that I believed that she wouldn't like me. We were friends for a decade. Then I admitted this to her, and she literally left the room. And then I asked myself, what did I just do? And then the tidal wave of guilt and shame came back. So do I want to be seen now? Does anyone want to be seen after going through a moment like that? What did I do? I go, you know what? Obviously this mask wasn't perfect. And with no other option, the OCD side of me tried to perfect it. Because I never thought the option of removing the mask was an option. Well, obviously you screwed up, so let's take this to the next level and hide behind this mask even more so no one can see the true me. We'll stop there because it goes down a path that not many people want to go see. But what happens when you want to be seen, but then at the same time are hiding simultaneously? It's a dichotomy that really messes with your head. Messed with our next speaker's head a little bit. And I invite Jessica Coulthard to the stage to share her story.
Hello. So I'm here standing in front of you today as an introvert. I spent most of my life, and I'm going to say probably about 45 years of those years of my life, hiding and not showing people who I really was. And for me, as a child, that meant, joining teams, but always standing just outside that circle, never really participating in the connection that you would normally have as a team sport, right? I mean, when you're playing with a team, you connect, you get together, you join forces, and you become one. And for me, I was always just outside that, right? I could fake it really well, I was part of the team, but I just never wanted to really be a part of the team. I didn't like group dynamics. I had lots of friends, I've always had lots of friends, but they've always been like, one-offs. I could spend time with a one-to-one. I don't like groups. Still not a fan, but that's part of being vulnerable, right? Is you got to push yourself through and see the reward on the other side. But as a child, I had no idea what an introvert was. I had no idea that I was, not the only one. I just figured that there was something, I was shy, that I didn't have confidence, I didn't really understand it. I didn't have the language, I didn't have the tools, I didn't have the resources to understand it. So I just thought there was something a little bit just not quite right with me. I was just shy. And now, moving forward into my life, just going through school and having lots of friends and not really lacking necessarily those connections, but they just weren't, you feel like there's just something missing. Like you've got friends and you hang out and you do stuff with them, but there's just something missing there, right? There's that genuine connection with people. And I remember I met a friend at work, her name is Vicky. And we met through work, and we've been friends now for probably 20 years. And I would say about 10 years ago, I was at her house. She'd invited me over for dinner, like she'd done many, many times. And I was sitting on her couch, and I'm just looking at her. And I'm thinking to myself, like, wow, this woman, like she just, when you're in her presence, she just oozes love and warmth and connection and just, like, it's sticky. Like, you just feel it, right? And I'm sitting on the couch, and I'm thinking, like, I'm not oozing anything. Like, I'm just, like she's giving me so much of herself in that moment. And I just didn't feel like I was really giving anything back. Like I was there, I was enjoying her company, I knew I loved her, like she was a good friend. And yet I still felt like I wasn't giving as much to the relationship, to the friendship as she was. And it was that moment when I realized that I didn't like it. Like I didn't want to live like this anymore. I wanted to feel what she was clearly feeling. I wanted to be a part of that. I wanted that connection and the ability to share it, to have somebody feel that in my presence, right? Because I felt it was a good feeling, right? And I wasn't giving that to anybody in my life. And so that was the moment, right? It's that aha moment where once you know something, you're kind of screwed. Like it's like, I don't know how to deal with this moment, but I also know I don't want to go back to not knowing it. Right? So it's a process, it takes a long time. And so I would say a couple of years after that, and recognizing that I had to do the work and I wanted to do the work, that I was at a different job at this point, and another friend who I thought was a really good friend of mine said to me one day, she goes, Jess, and pardon me, you wouldn't say shit if your mouth was full of it. And I realized that she was so true. It was so true. Like I still was holding back so much of myself that I hadn't found my voice, never mind, that way to connect with people yet. And so what I've found is that change happens in two different ways, right? It's either comes from inside. So I had that aha moment of my own where I knew I wanted to make a change. Then now I had somebody else give me from the outside. Right? So now I had a double whammy. So this was when I really started to realize that even though I'd had that aha moment and that I knew I wanted to change, I really hadn't done much. I hadn't done enough work yet. And so again, the years go on and I keep on working through and making connections and doing whatnot and just really becoming more aware. And then the one that really started to hit me was I looked back over even the relationships that I'd had with like the men in my life. I'd been married, and I started to look back and realize that I don't even think I'd let him get to know me, because I don't even think I really knew who I was. How could I possibly let somebody else get to know me? But knowing that I had done that and married somebody, that was really disheartening for me. And so then as I was now beginning to enter into a new relationship, luckily I was taking some counseling at the time when I had this moment. And so I had a conversation with my counselor. And I said to her, I'm in a relationship right now, and this wasn't a good one. Like, I knew it was going to end badly. It was the red flags were there. Everything about this relationship was destined to fail. And this, I also realized that this was a pattern that I had been doing, because if I don't know who I am, and I don't know what I want, and I don't know how to connect with people, how can I possibly be finding what I'm looking for in another person, right? And so that, again, was another aha moment for me where, you know, that recognizing that I needed to start to be vulnerable and I needed to start to let people see me. That was scary. Because as an introvert, allowing people to hear my voice was just opening me up to the possibility of judgment, the possibility of having to defend my opinion. That scared me more than anything else, right? If somebody asked me a question and I took a stand about it, now I was in it. Now I had to defend myself. And that scared me more than anything else, right? Because what if I was wrong? What if I took a stand for something and then I stood my ground on it against it, and then it turns out I was wrong? That scared me. But as I started to go, I realized that if I didn't start to do this in my life, I was never going to be able to, first of all, create a good relationship with my friends, my family, potential relationships. I had to start to stand for something. I had to start to allow myself to be seen. I refer to it as, you know, as you're showing your soft underbelly, right? It's like rolling over and just saying, yes, I trust somebody. So again, I'm in this counseling, and I said to my counselor, I know that this relationship that I'm in is going to end badly. And so it should, because it was a mess. It wasn't where I needed to be at all. But I still hadn't done enough of the work. But in that moment, I realized that the most important thing for me was to feel it. Like, I had not, because I had guarded myself so much and not let myself be seen to anybody, I'd put this massive wall up around me. And I needed to let that down, even though I knew I was going to get hurt, right? And I said that to her. I said, I know this is going to end badly, but I want to feel it. And I'm going to let this man into my bubble. I'm going to let this man into my heart, because there's one thing to let somebody see your mind and see what you think, but to let someone see how you feel, that's a whole other level of vulnerability, right? Because now you're leaving yourself open to be hurt, and in a way that you can't control. But I decided that I wanted to go through that pain. So I intentionally continued with this relationship, and I opened my heart up to this man. And yeah, it ended really, really badly. But I felt it. I actually felt heartbreak. I felt what it's like to miss somebody. Because up until that point, I realized even my marriage, who was like my ex-husband, the father of my son, you would think that that's somebody that you would have connected with and let your guard down with, but I hadn't. And when our marriage ended, I didn't care. I was so protected that it didn't even matter to me. Right? It was a matter of just like getting on with things and, you know, adjusting to my new life as being divorced. But I didn't care that he wasn't in my life anymore. And then I saw that also through other relationships. Looking back, I was the one who broke up with them. I always took control of the situation, right? And so in this particular relationship, I changed that. I needed to feel it. I needed to miss him. I needed to feel hurt. And I did. But you know what? I actually liked it. Because I had, again, I guess maybe I took control of the situation. I don't know. But okay, still got work to do. But I finally felt it. I felt what it was like to genuinely love somebody and then miss them when they were no longer in my life. And I tell you, I would go through it again 100 times because it was worth it. And I know now, moving forward, what I'm looking for. Like, I needed to go through that to get to the point where I can probably now find what I'm looking for. I know what I'm looking for in a partner. I know the language that I need to use. I know what I need to share. I know what I need them to share with me, as opposed to kind of just going through life on the surface. So, like I said, I would highly recommend allowing myself, like I would do that again in a heartbeat. You could pay me millions and millions of dollars to not have to go through that, and I would say no, and I would go through it because it is just the best thing that I ever did for myself. So if anyone ever says to me, like, what do you think of vulnerability? Frickin' love it. I do, because it's completely changed my life, right? And I know that it's going to just catapult me forward through my life. I know that I'm not going to approach relationships with men, with even my family, with my friends in the same way anymore, because I want to know them. I want to feel them feeling me, right? You know what I mean? Yeah, okay. So anyway, so my message basically is that when given the opportunity to be vulnerable, even if it, it just doesn't seem like it's the right thing or doesn't feel like it's going to be good, trust me, it's going to be awesome. So thank you.
Centrally located in the Richmond Auto Mall since 1984, Richmond Honda features a large selection of Honda certified pre-owned vehicles. Inside the showroom, Honda's newest models are displayed for viewing, and the dealership is staffed 7 days a week for financial consultation.